The train accident will have some impact on the voting behavior of the young because it served like political socialization experience for many young people. They understood that politics are important for their lives.
Welcome to Euractiv's Beyond the Byline podcast. I am Evi Kiori, and in this episode we take a look at the upcoming parliamentary elections in Greece, which parties and candidates are in the running, who is ahead in the polls, what can we expect, and will Greece have a coalition government this time around? Greece is set to hold parliamentary elections on 21st of May, and experts believe that it's unlikely for any single party to win outright in the initial round. There are approximately 9.8 million registered voters, including 440,000 young individuals aged 17 to 21 who are eligible to vote for the very first time and are expected to make a difference. Their decision at the ballot box is particularly important because this is the first Greek election to employ proportional representation.
The electoral system we had for the past elections, the past 7 or 8 elections, was a plurality. It was an electoral system that had plurality tendencies.
Explains Yannis Tsirbas, professor of political sciences at Kapodistriakou University of Athens.
It gave a huge seat bonus to the first party. 50 seats were allocated to the first party just because it became first.
The compensatory seat system, where the winning party would receive a 50-seat bonus.
Stella Lavie is professor of public policy at Pantheon University of Athens and the Queen Mary University of London.
Meaning it would be much easier for the first party to have enough seats to formulate a government. So this new simple proportional representation system was brought in by the previous government, and it was legislated. So it was during the Syriza government that was brought in. And it was legislated and is starting being implemented this time around. So it's a little bit more difficult to have a result and a little bit more difficult to have a government in reality.
This time around, voters will choose 300 members of parliament using the new proportional representation system. Out of these, 280 seats will be allocated proportionally based on the votes received by each party, while the party with the highest number of votes will be awarded 20 seats. To enter parliament and serve a 4-year term, parties must obtain at least 3% of the total votes cast. And to secure an outright victory, the leading candidate will need around 46% of the vote. However, this is a percentage that will be very difficult to achieve, meaning that for the first time in its political history, Greece is promoting a system that encourages the formation of a coalition government. And although the system promotes a coalition government, the 3 main parties have already stated that they do not intend to form a coalition with each other, or at least this is the intention during the first round of elections. So in this case, a new round of elections will be held in early July.
We've seen much more difficult elections and in much harder times for Greece. As you remember, during the Eurozone crisis, we had very, very significant elections. Of course, this does not mean that this election is not important. This wouldn't be possible in this era of polycrisis that we are in. All elections are important, and because of the complexity of the problems, of the constant different challenges, and the need for stability and good management and multitasking skills, apart from anything else, from government.
The main contenders vying for seats in the 300-member Greek parliament are Conservative Centre-Right New Democracy Party, led by the current Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, the Syriza Party with Alexis Tsipras positioned on the centre-left, the Pan-Hellenic Socialist Movement Pasokinal with Nikos Androulakis, and the Communist Party. For the first time, Greeks living abroad will also be able to vote on May 20th without having to return to Greece to do so. Analysts are describing this pre-electoral period as one of the quietest they have witnessed in the history of elections, and the focus of each candidate party to be very predictable and outdated.
So in reality, I think all parties are quite blunt in their discourse and quite inward looking. I would even say that the campaigns are a bit old fashioned. I think this is because all parties are afraid of the difficult questions that are related to global challenges and global problems, from the new migration waves that we're expecting to how artificial intelligence is going to change the working environment and the global economy. Because exactly these big questions are very difficult and very challenging to answer and to propose solutions. So a lot of the discussion is about the domestic politics, important issues such as the educational system, the health system, but avoiding to really go to the more challenging global questions, I would say.
During its electoral campaign, New Democracy made several promises, including building upon the tax cuts implemented in the first term, achieving an annual growth rate of 3%, attracting more foreign direct investments, and reducing unemployment to below 8%. The left-wing party Syriza aims to increase wages and pensions, impose limits on profit margins in the energy sector, reduce weekly working hours, safeguard minority rights, and abolish Greece's bank rescue fund. PASOK, the third largest political force in Greece, advocates for a shift towards green energy sources, a stronger national healthcare system, higher wages in the public sector, and improved transparency and meritocracy within the government. Greeks will vote under the shadows of the fatal train crash and the surveillance scandal. Some people in Greece hold Prime Minister Mitsotakis responsible for the country's worst rail tragedy, which claimed the lives of at least 57 individuals. As a result, many experts anticipate a decline in support for his party in the polls. Although Greeks made it clear during the mass protests that followed the train crash that public anger was directed not only at the current government but also at Greece's entire political system, on May 16th, just days before the election, relatives of the victims filed a lawsuit against 17 individuals. The lawsuit includes the Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, former and current transport ministers Kostas Karamanlis and Giorgos Gerapetritis, the former and current presidents and directors of the Greek Railway Organization, OSE, and the Hellenic Train Company. But will the fatal train crash and the Greek Watergate really impact how Greeks will vote?
The train accident will have some impact on the voting behavior of the young, because it served like a political socialization experience for many young people. They understood that politics are important for their lives. But I don't see that it will have a major impact. The same goes for the Greek Watergate scandal. I believe that this affects more some people who have a great deal of political interest, and they have some sensitivities about how democracy works. But this is not a widespread sentiment.
I think the rail accident is very likely to affect the vote of the young people, or even we may see them abstaining from the elections. Not all of them, but a big proportion, since this was an accident that really affected quite a lot of students and people that were using this rail line. Not that this is not an important issue for the rest of the society. But I think it is quite clear that the situation of the rail system in Greece it has been bad for many, many years, and all parties that are competing for this election, all key parties that are competing for these elections. Now, the tapping of the leader of PASOK may affect some of the centrist voters that are more interested on this issue. But all the polls, when citizens are asked how important they see that, they don't rate it very highly.
You're listening to Euractiv's Beyond the Byline podcast. Subscribe to our podcast newsletter on euractiv.com/newsletters. And if you want to expand your knowledge in other fields, you can listen to our tech, agri-food, and health podcast. And if you have any comments or ideas, you can drop a line at podcast@euractiv.com. And New Democracy is currently in the lead according to the polls, with a 6% advantage over Syriza that comes second. PASOK-Kinal is currently in the third place. Syriza's leader Alexis Tsipras encouraged voters to not rely solely on the polls. His party had requested greater transparency from pollsters, specifically asking them to publish the primary data of their surveys. However, both New Democracy and the Association of Polling Companies rejected this request. So who will be running faster towards the 46% votes threshold?
The polls show this, the Conservative being ahead for something like 6%, but this does not mean much. We could always have surprises because of people abstaining or people wanting to support smaller parties, since we have this proportional representation system. So there may be ideas or hope that there can be a coalition government with smaller parties in there. So we may see a different outcome. I think what we already know, and it seems to be a very likely scenario, is that we won't have a government formed immediately.
There is also another discourse that says that the opposition voters do not disclose as much their voting intention. If you add to that the fact that this is a very silent campaign period, I think I wouldn't make some exact predictions.
Οι εξηγήσεις που δόθηκαν για αυτές τις παρακολουθήσεις, κύριε Τζίμα, δεν ήταν επαρκείς. Ο κύριος Ανδρουλάκης δεν αποτελεί κανέναν απολύτως κίνδυνο για την εθνική ασφάλεια.
Prime Minister Mitsotakis admitted in a televised debate that took place on the 10th of May that there was no reason for the leader of Kinal, Mr. Androulakis, to be under surveillance by the national services, mentioning that Mr. Androulakis isn't a threat for the country. However, he failed to provide a clear answer on why he was under surveillance. So, is there a possibility for these two parties to collaborate in case the New Democracy Party doesn't secure the first place?
There is this possibility after the second election. If there is a second election, I believe that PASOK, Kinal, and Mr. Androulakis will have a great responsibility upon him to collaborate with New Democracy, if New Democracy is the first party. And I think they will form a government together after the second election in this scenario, even perhaps with a different prime minister and not Mr. Mitsotakis as prime minister. I don't know, but I believe that they will find a way to collaborate if this is necessary.
On the other hand, Professor Ladi is not that optimistic when it comes to this coalition because, as she explained, there are more things dividing the two parties than bringing them together.
I think it's very unlikely, and this is, I don't think it's so much about this surveillance issue. I think it's because the two leaders, the Mitsotakis and Androulakis, don't have much in common at all. And actually, what PASOK is asking in order to get into a government, it's quite unrealistic. So in reality, I don't think there is much of a chemistry there to even start discussing about a coalition government. Even more importantly, I don't think the current timing will put any pressure upon the two leaders to formulate a coalition government. We're not where we were in 2012 when it was absolutely necessary to have a government straight away in order to avoid the country's default. So I think they will both prefer to go for a second round and see if they can get a better result.
Now, the case of the wiretapping scandal has raised many questions in the European Commission, which has expressed concerns about the rule of law in Greece. So could the outcome of the election have an impact on the relations between Athens and Brussels?
The European Commission and the European Union and Brussels is not a homogeneous institution. The Greek government hasn't paid much attention to the impact that this scandal has on the European level. And I believe, whichever the outcome is after the election, that the Greek government should pay more attention to this issue at the European level and try to improve the image of Greece towards the European Commission, because this scandal has done a lot of damage to the image of Greece.
We've seen periods that there was much more tension, and this was again during the Eurozone crisis. The rule of law discussion and even the concerns expressed by the Commission or the Parliament are not really great. Of course, there is a lot of improvement that we could have in the legislation, in the modernization of secret services and the scrutiny of their actions, or the speeding up the court's decisions. But this is already there in place in all parties and in the governing parties' agenda. Some of it has already started being implemented. Some other stuff is going to be funded by the Recovery and Resilience Facility. So I don't think there is an issue there. Where there could be an issue, but I think it's very unlikely again, is if we had a coalition government between Syriza and Varoufakis or other radical left parties, and we had this Dimitra plan that Varoufakis proposed coming into play, where Greece's position in the Eurozone would get challenged.
Dimitra is Yanis Varoufakis' radical new proposal for the Greek economy. Dimitra would allow Greeks to make payments outside the banking system without being charged hefty fees. Varoufakis insists that Dimitra is not an alternative currency, but rather an alternative platform for transactions. The reason for creating such a mechanism would not only be to avoid bank fees, but also to have another tool available should capital controls ever be reintroduced.
But I think this is a very unlikely scenario, because I don't think there is any agreement between Syriza and Varoufakis to try to have a coalition government together. So my take is that there won't be any major issues between the EU and Athens, between Brussels and Athens after the elections. And even if we go for a second round, there will be a government that will be cooperating as it has been for the last few years.
I am Eva Chiori, and this was Euractiv's Beyond the Byline podcast. Visit Euractiv for the latest news, and if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, you can do so on your favorite podcasting app. Thank you for listening, and until next week.